Hey y'all, Michael here. Welcome back to the channel. Today I'm going to be talking about one of my favorite books that I've read this year, Freak the Mighty. Freak the Mighty is a coming-of-age novel written by adult mystery author Rodman Philbrick. This book follows the duo of Maxwell Cain and Kevin Avery as they make their way through the 8th grade. Maxwell Cain is our strong but intellectually challenged protagonist who we see the story through. He is taken care of by his grandparents as his mother passed away and his dad is in jail. Kevin Avery is his neighbor, who is extraordinarily smart for his age, but cannot do many things physically because he has Morquio syndrome. Morquio syndrome is a genetic disease where the person's spine and bones don't grow as fast as their internal organs, causing them to be very impaired physically. The story starts out simple, with the main duo trying to learn how to empathize with and understand each other as they go through the 8th grade, but in the last third of the book, the story takes a major turn. Max's dad, Kenneth Cain, is a convicted murderer who convinces the court to let him out of prison on parole on account of his faith, where he breaks into Max's home and forces him to go on the run with him to start a new life. We learn that Kenneth killed Max's mom, Annie, while he takes Max to the tenements, the worse off and more dangerous part of the city they live in. After almost dying at the hands of his father while trying to save Loretta, Max is saved by Kevin, Iggy, and Loretta, and Kenneth is sent to prison for the rest of his life. After this, Kevin unexpectedly has a seizure during his birthday party and gets hospitalized. At the end of the story, Kevin gives Max a blank book so that he can document their adventures before Kevin's untimely death. And after a year of a deep depression, Max decides to write in the book as a way to cope with his feelings, and we discover that the book we've been reading is the book Max wrote the whole time. Now there's a lot to love about the book. There's also some pretty major flaws that hold it back a lot, in my opinion. First, let's talk about the positives. I think that the pacing of the book was really good. Most of the scenes that weren't important only had at most one chapter about them, or even just a few pages, while the more important scenes had several chapters dedicated to them, to emphasize that they're more important than others. Second, I think the world building in this book was done very well. It's simple without being boring or vague. Take this description of the tenements from the book as an example. It's this big, falling apart place with a bunch of apartments, and it looks sad and smells like fish and sour milk. There are a lot of bikes and toys lying around, mostly bashed up and broken. As we can see from this description, the book gives a sufficient amount of information without going too overboard, allowing the reader to create their own conclusions and interpretations about these areas. Third, I think that the relationship between Max and Kevin was developed very well. At the start, they seemed very uncomfortable with each other, with Max actively trying to avoid Kevin because his sheer knowledge scares him. As the book progresses, however, their friendship gets tighter between the two, and they start to put more trust in each other. This is perfectly exemplified when Kevin shows Max the research building he has to go to for his surgery, as through the mock blood pact they make, Kevin tells Max that only a select handful of people know about his surgery, and that Max is important enough to him that he's willing to tell him this. I also think that the moral of how we have to be our own people instead of living as someone else is shown very well. At the beginning, Max just accepts that he lives in the gruesome shadow of his father, and doesn't think about how being viewed the same as his father hurts him. As the story progresses, however, Max starts to learn to open up and be his own person, and he starts to get accepted by more people for the first time in his life. This part of his character arc is completed by him physically defeating his trauma and negative image through escaping his father and getting him arrested. I think this is a good message to give to the teenage age group the story is trying to go for, as this is the point in our lives where our lives stop getting dictated by our parents or other people, when we can start making our own decisions for ourselves. Finally, I think that the motif of King Arthur is not only developed along the story, but also strengthens the story considerably. This motif shows why the characters go on their quests to help people and it shows off the courage and selflessness towards helping others. It makes our main characters seem much more brave and strong, and it gives this story a lot more personality compared to other young adult novels who stay mostly in the realm of realism. Even though there's all of these positives, there are some weaknesses about this book that really show to me. I think one of the worst problems of this book is that the ending is very weak compared to the rest of the story. This problem showed up in another book I read, that being The Outsiders. There was so much the writer could have built upon. We could have seen how Max developed after Kevin's death, both socially and intellectually, or we could have seen how he got closer with the people he still has, such as his grandparents. But no, the writer decided that he could get out of writing a developed ending by just putting in the first line of the book, showing that the main character was writing the book we've been reading the whole time. As well, I don't think the book has aged very well, for two reasons. First, there's quite a few references to things from the 80s that aren't relevant in our modern society, such as Walkmans or dial-up internet. While this isn't a big issue, it can make it harder to relate to the book at points, because people who are born after the 80s can't relate to these subjects when they're brought up, and if someone isn't educated on 80s culture, they can be brought out of the book entirely. I think that a lot of issues start to arise with the second problem, which is that a lot of the language used in the book is considered offensive by modern standards. I think the clearest examples of this phenomenon are the rampant use of the words cripple and the R slur, used to make fun of physically and intellectually disabled people, respectively. While it was most likely accepted to use these terms in the past, and it makes sense for more vulgar and socially isolated characters such as Kenny Kane and the Lees to use these words, it still makes the book a lot more insensitive and difficult to read in the modern day. Words have a lot of power, and words like this can not only alienate some of the audience reading it, but can also cause some people to think that using these words are more socially acceptable than they actually are. If someone reads this book in school, and they aren't educated about the ramifications or damaging effects of using this word, especially to describe people that have these physical or mental disabilities, they may think that it's socially acceptable to start using this slur in their daily conversation, and that it doesn't affect anyone or harm anyone. And at the end of the day, what do words like cripple kid or the R slur even add to this story? In most instances of the use of the R slur in the story, replacing the slur with other tamer words like idiot or stupid kid would really not make the book much worse in the current year. Now, the book version of Freak the Mighty isn't the only version of the story that exists out there. There was also a film adaptation of it, titled The Mighty. Now, personally, for most people I've talked to, I'm a contrarian for my opinion, because I think that the movie is really good. I think it's better than the book in some cases, which is surprising considering I don't like the film adaptations. Most of the time, movie adaptations suffer from time constraints, causing them to skip vital information in order to move the plot forward faster to fit the time. This also happens to The Mighty. For example, a lot of exposition was taken out, such as the information on Max's past, which explains why he acts the way he is, why he's viewed the way he is, and why he's afraid of Kevin like he is in the beginning of the story, to make time for more important scenes. Also, Max and Kevin seem to really dislike each other at certain parts of the movie, like how Kevin constantly makes fun of Max's intelligence, or how Max occasionally has mental breakdowns and starts yelling at Kevin and starts hating him with no provocation in that scene coming from Kevin. Finally, I just want to point out that in the scene where Kevin dies in the movie, Max outruns a truck on the highway. While I still really like this scene, and I find this part really funny, this one part kind of destroys the tension built up after Kevin's death, as instead of worrying if Max will be able to see Kevin before he dies, or if he's dead already, instead we start to laugh because of how absurd Max outrunning a truck is. All that being said, the movie has a lot of strengths, which I think makes it better than the book, in my opinion. For example, the ending is done better in the movie than the book. While it still has the cop-out ending, the movie adds scenes like Max voluntarily answering a question in school, something he would never do beforehand, showing how he developed as a person to continue Kevin's legacy. Talking about added scenes, the scene where Kevin and Max go to the museum and see the knights is a very important, very necessary scene to add, as it takes the already important and well-developed motif of King Arthur from the original book, and it develops it even further. In addition, I think the acting and role choices were very good for this movie, and portraying the characters better than I could even imagine them in the original book. For example, Max's dad goes from a slightly insane murderer to a complete psychopath through the acting of James Gandolfini, who would later go on to play mafia boss Tony Soprano in The Sopranos, which I know is a very popular show with my age demographic. Surprisingly, Kevin, who was played by a child actor, the brother of Macaulay Culkin, was surprisingly well acted in acting like a caring but slightly arrogant know-it-all. Finally, I think Kevin's death scene and the scene after that are done better in the movie than in the book. The death scene is almost more tragic in the movie, as instead of seeing Kevin die, Max learns in the morning that Kevin died in his sleep from a seizure, meaning that he didn't get to spend his final moments with him, and that the final conversation they had, even though he didn't know it, would be their last. Also, Max discovering that the medical research building wasn't even a part of the hospital and breaking down in the middle of the laundromat is much more impactful to me, especially when you compare it to the book, where in this scene, Max is running down hallways and breaking down doors like he's a wild animal on the loose. To conclude, I highly recommend both the book and movie versions of Freak the Mighty, as I believe it is a very fun, coming-of-age romp that has some genuinely touching, emotional scenes scattered throughout. On a scale of 1 to 10, I would give the book a 7 out of 10, and the movie an 8 out of 10. The book is a 7 out of 10 for me, because even though all the important characters and plot points were developed very well, the moral is very important for teenagers, and there were good character arcs in it, such as Kevin and Max's, I think the book and the language used inside of it especially has not aged very well for modern times, and the ending takes a more meta approach of saying that Max was actually writing it instead of giving us a proper conclusion, which makes the ending of the book feel hollow. Meaning that it doesn't feel as impactful for me by the end as other books, even including The Outsiders, which I mentioned before. For The Mighty, the movie, I gave it an 8 out of 10, as even though it suffers from the same problems as other book-to-film adaptations, such as skipping important exposition to make more time, or casting actors that can change how you feel about certain characters, I think the movie improved in a lot of areas over the book, which made it a more enjoyable experience to watch. My favorite of these additions, as I mentioned before, are the added Nights at the Museum scene, the added hopelessness to Kevin's death scene, and the emphasis on Max's character development, especially at the end. Thank you for listening to this book review, and remember to like and subscribe. I hope this video inspires you to at least check out Freak the Mighty or The Mighty for yourself, or that it gave you a new outlook on either the book or the movie, whether you read or watched it. Have a great day. See you next time.